Welcome to basic revolver maintenance for your Taurus revolvers. In this video, we're going to cover some very important steps that you're going to need to perform to any revolver that you use for competition, concealed carry, hunting, or even just casual shooting. Now, these steps will work across our entire line of revolvers, whether they're a small frame like this 856, a Judge, or a Tracker, a medium frame, or something as big as our Raging Hunter series of revolvers. And the reason these steps are important is because revolvers, unlike semi-automatic pistols, do not tolerate abuse well. As you can see just from looking, we have lots of screws in these guns. There's lots of small parts. So these are things that need to be checked on a regular basis. We recommend that you clean your revolvers at a minimum of every 200 rounds. And every time you clean your revolver, we also recommend that you go through and you perform these basic maintenance steps to make sure that your firearm is functional and reliable and ready to go when you need it. So first and foremost, we're going to talk about some of the tools that you're going to want to have on hand during this maintenance process. Now, we've got quite the bit of tooling laid out over here. The most important things that you're going to want to have is going to be a good screwdriver and a really comprehensive set of quality screwdriver bits. It would be nice if you could also have a screwdriver that had a torque adjustment in it. And while this isn't necessary, it helps you know that you're torquing your screws to the right amount so that they're not going to walk free or something like that. If you don't have one of these, there are some tricks that we can go through that will help you get those screws torqued in properly. Now, moving on, if you haven't already viewed our cleaning series on these, I recommend that you start there. Once you do your maintenance, it's a lot easier to do maintenance on a clean gun than it is on a gun that's covered in dirt and mud and oil and all sorts of carbon fouling. So all these guns have been cleaned, and we can start with our maintenance. And the first thing that we're going to start with is we're going to start for checking these guns for spring tension in all the areas that are supposed to have spring tension. First off, you can see here on our Raging Hunter, we have the cylinder latch. This is supposed to have spring tension in the forward and back. Once we've checked to make sure that's good to go, we can also check to make sure that the forward cylinder latch also has spring tension. This is going to be up and down spring tension. If you've already cleaned these guns, you know that that's there, but I like to be very thorough when I'm going through this. This is also the first area for tightness that we want to check. So there is a screw in the cylinder latch that we want to check and make sure that it's nice and tight. Now, this doesn't need to be torqued to a specific spec. It just needs to be reasonably hand tight. So you can take any gunsmithing quality screwdriver bit, place it in here, and just give it a little twist, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, just like everything else, to make sure that's good and tight. And you can do that on all of the revolvers that we have here, whether it's the Raging Hunter, the small frame 856, or the Judge. I'm going to check all of these at once. All right, looks like all of those are good, and they all have the requisite spring tension that we're looking for. Now, the next thing that we're going to check for spring tension is we are going to check the hammer spring for spring tension. On the 856, I've removed the grip so I can show you what we're talking about. All of these guns, it's very easy to remove the grips. I want to go ahead and cock that hammer back and look down on the inside of the gun and make sure that this mainspring is actually compressing and not kinking up or binding in some strange way. This is a nice clean stack, so everything looks good to go with this. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin this back, I'm going to press the trigger, and I'm just going to release this forward so it goes all the way forward. Pinning the trigger forward, I can then roll the gun over to the side, and looking through the frame, I can see that the firing pin is protruding through the frame, telling me that both the firing pin has the appropriate amount of protrusion, and then when I release the trigger, that the firing pin spring also still has spring tension in it. That's very easy to do once you're looking through the frame window of the revolver, and obviously is something that you would only do with a gun that you know has been cleared out, like one that you've just finished cleaning and now you're moving into the maintenance process on. From there, I've now checked the hammer for spring tension. I've made sure that the firing pin spring has spring tension, that the firing pin is protruding correctly, and that the trigger return spring is working. The next thing that I want to check for spring tension and function is going to be the hammer and trigger together, not in the single action mode. To do this, I'm going to go ahead and just dry fire the gun as if I was normally firing a shot. I'll press the trigger all the way to the rear and release it. The trigger should release cleanly. It shouldn't stop or stick in any places. That way I know the trigger return spring is operating normally and has the appropriate amount of tension in it. You can do that as many times as you like and as fast or as slow as you feel is appropriate. One thing to note is that you shouldn't pin it and try to ride it forward, because that can actually induce a false reset, which is user error. When you're operating this, you're going to want to press it and release it. So we've now checked all of the important areas for spring tension. The next thing that we want to check, and again, we want to do this every 200 rounds or so, is we want to make sure that the screws that are securing the side plate in place are still appropriately tight. Now, to do this, you'll need to remove the grips. As you can see on our judge here, the grip covers up 1.5 of the side plate screws, but leaves the yoke screw fully exposed. The same is true on the Raging Hunter, where again the grips are covering up one of the side plate screws, but the yoke screw is fully exposed. The reason why this screw is called the yoke screw is because it's also used to retain the cylinder and the yoke mechanism. We don't ever want to take that out. That is not a user level task. That is a gunsmith or armorer level task, and we want to leave that to someone who is qualified to perform it. But you're definitely qualified to make sure these are tight. Now, if you happen to have a torque wrench, what you want to do is check to make sure that these screws are torqued to at least 10 inch-pounds. When you're doing this, it's important to be careful so that you don't slide the bit out of the gun when you're checking the torque level of the screws. So you notice I'm very carefully making sure everything is lined up, and I'm turning this until the line matches 10 inch-pounds. So we're going to go ahead and show you that again. I'm going to make sure that my screwdriver is lined up. I'm putting pressure on the gun to keep it nice and stable, and I'm turning this until the line matches at 10 inch-pounds. And the last thing I'll do is I'll do that on the yoke screw as well. Once I'm certain all my screws have been torqued down correctly, I've actually completed the very basics of the Revolver maintenance package. There are other steps that you can perform. I honestly recommend checking your sights. If you have a model with adjustable sights, you'll want to check to make sure that your top sight actually still has spring tension and isn't either bottomed out or topped out. You'll want to check to make sure that the rear sight has a little bit of play that you can move in your hand, but not so much that it clicks past where you would want it to go. But by and large, that covers your basic maintenance steps for these revolvers. Again, we recommend that this maintenance is performed every 200 rounds, especially if you're on an aggressive firing schedule. If you use one of these guns for personal protection, competition, or hunting, or you train a lot with it, you need to remember that this is not a G3. You can't beat it up, throw it in the mud, and never take care of it. Revolvers require care, attention, and regular basic maintenance.